There was an ancient Syrian Greek writer. His name was Lucian, and he lived nearly 2000 years ago. He wrote plenty of stories, and one of them was a story of Lucian and 50 of his companions who take a boat, which carries them to the moon on a giant wave in the sea. When they arrive on the moon, they see a war going on between a race of three-headed vultures and some other species from another planet. Lucian and his friends join this war, and they have plenty of other adventures and finally come back to Earth. People have been fascinated by space and especially the moon for more than 2000 years, as we can see from this story. In today's current event story, we talk about NASA's latest spate of programs to once again take people back to the moon. Hello and welcome to What's New Today. This is the Kids and Family podcast. This is your host Sangeeta from India. Every Monday and Friday, I'm joined by one curious child from anywhere in the world. And together we explore a very interesting news story, which could be from science or space or business or video games or even Marvel characters. And today with me is a very, very exuberant 7-year-old, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Advik, and I like listening to this podcast.
I am thrilled that you love listening to this podcast. When do you listen to podcasts? I know last time when you came, you said you listen to it usually at night.
That routine is still going on.
What's your favorite episode amongst the more recent ones?
Episode 49, How VR Goggles Can Help You Reduce Pain.
Have you heard of the word virtual reality before you heard this podcast?
Yes, I saw it on my dad's video game glasses.
Oh, you've seen somebody playing video game with virtual reality glasses.
I also have played.
Oh, you have played video games wearing virtual reality glasses?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so what did this episode tell you?
Old people have so much pain, and those VR goggles can help them reduce pain.
Wow. Thank you, Advik. Before we begin today's news story about NASA's most recent mission to the moon, I thought we could start with a very funny quiz. I'll give you the name of some food items, and I'd like you to guess whether Neil Armstrong and his friends carried this particular food item on their trip to the moon in the year 1969. Here's the first food item, idli.
No.
That's correct. Idli was not one of the foods that Neil Armstrong and his friends carried to the moon. The second food item, coffee.
Never.
Why?
Because they would have coffee on the space station.
They will go to the coffee in the space station like a restaurant, stop over, en route to their trip to the moon or somewhere else.
How could they carry coffee?
They do apparently carry coffee. I don't know how. So they probably made a kind of coffee that would last about a week.
They went to the moon in a week?
They actually took, I think, about 4.5 days to get to the moon. But they had to carry food for about a week because it took them 4.5 days to get to the moon and another 2-3 days to come back to Earth. So all in, they should have carried food that would last them at least a week.
Then they drank the coffee.
Yeah, I think they did. If they felt very sleepy, somebody has to stay awake, right, to steer the spaceship so that they go to moon and they don't end up going to some other planet.
Right.
Right. Okay, last question. Salads.
They did not. They definitely did not.
Oh, they definitely did not. Why?
Because salad has veggies and veggies would last less than a day.
Let's assume the salads were kept in a nicely refrigerated place. Do you then think they would have carried salads on that trip?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, the answer is right. They did carry salads on the first trip to the moon. They also carried brownies, puddings, coffee, spaghetti, and salads. Interesting.
Interesting. So they can have a comfortable ride looking at the moon and the space.
Just like our car drives. And drinking coffee.
The passengers can drink coffee, but the driver cannot.
Yeah, that's a little risky. for the driver to be drinking, especially if the coffee is hot.
Right.
In today's episode, we talk about NASA's latest attempt at sending people back to the moon. So, Advik, you do know the name of the first person who ever landed on moon, right?
Neil Armstrong.
And the person who is with him?
Buzz Aldrin.
Do you know if anybody else has walked on the surface of the moon apart from these two people?
Rakesh Sharma.
No, Rakesh Sharma did not walk on the surface of the moon. He just went into space and came back.
Oh.
Do you think anybody else has ever walked on the surface of the moon apart from these two people?
No.
No. There were 10 more astronauts who've gone on missions after that. So totally, so far, there are 12 people from Earth who have gone on to walk on the surface of the moon.
Really?
Yeah. So the mission that sent Neil Armstrong to the moon was called the Apollo 11. Advik, do you know how to cycle?
I know how to cycle. I can cycle very well. U-turn, left turn, right turn.
Now imagine you're participating in a cycling race. What all would you do to prepare yourself? If you had to go on a certain cycling track, which is not a track you're used to, right? So how would you prepare yourself?
I would practice on the cycle track.
The new track, right? So similarly, before we sent Neil Armstrong to walk on the moon, what NASA did was they did a few practice missions, which was Apollo 8, Apollo 9, and Apollo 10. So Apollo 8, Apollo 9 and 10 also did some small practice runs, and then Apollo 11 was sent to the moon.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
To finally get people to land on the surface of the moon. Have you seen any videos of how they landed?
No.
There is a very interesting video of how Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were trying to walk on the surface of the moon. You should see this video. It's hilarious. They're barely able to walk. So they're like jumping up and down and bouncing, and then
That's because of the gravity isn't there.
You were spot on, 100% correct.
so they fall down and then they try to get up and then they again fall down. To me, it was like watching a Kung Fu Panda movie. I'm leaving a link to this video in the show notes below if any of our listeners would like to see this. So just like NASA sent 3 missions before it sent astronauts to land on the moon, do you know what NASA is now trying to do, Advik?
They finished the Apollo generation and started the Artemis one. The Artemis is going to help humans land on the moon.
And how are they going to do it? What are the different Artemis programs that are going to try and get people to the moon?
Artemis 1 is going to orbit the moon without any humans. Artemis 2 is going to go in a similar ride but with humans. Artemis 3 is going to orbit the moon and land on the moon, and then humans can walk.
Oh, wow. What has happened now to Artemis 1?
A few days ago, it had a technical problem. The fuel started to leak, and so it had been postponed for another day. Petrol and diesel came out.
Okay, what do you think they use in a space shuttle? Do you think they fill it with petrol and diesel?
A CNG?
CNG? No. So the fuel that space shuttles use is either liquefied hydrogen or liquefied oxygen.
But how do they liquefy the oxygen?
We can liquefy a gas like hydrogen if you can cool it to some very, very, very cold temperature. At that point, the hydrogen will become a liquid hydrogen. And then they'll store it in a container. And just before the space shuttle is about to take off, they'll start pouring that hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, and the liquid oxygen into different tanks there. So now you said earlier that the Apollo missions are all over and now they've begun this new Artemis mission. And
Yes.
Artemis I, which was supposed to go orbit the Earth, they've had to temporarily postpone the launch because of some hydrogen leak. Have you heard of the Greek god Artemis?
Yes. She has a bow and arrow in her hand.
So Artemis had a twin brother.
Twin brother.
That was Apollo. And both Apollo and Artemis shared a common love for archery. NASA, when they created the next mission to take people to the moon, they wanted to name this mission after Apollo's twin sister Artemis, so that Artemis could take off from wherever Apollo's work ended on the moon. And Artemis is also the lunar god, or the god of the moon, according to the Greek mythology.
Whoa! Speaking of the moon, I have some jokes. What do you call a nut which goes to the moon?
A cracker?
No, astronaut. Why is the moon always hungry?
Because it is mostly half full.
Because it only gets full once a month.
Fantastic one. I love that one. Who's your favorite Greek god?
My favorite Greek god is Poseidon because he's cool.
Because when he's in water, he's usually cool.
Both meanings.
Oh, you're speaking with puns now. 7-year-old. Where we leave our listeners today is that the Artemis I mission, which was temporarily halted because there was a hydrogen leak, the launch date has been postponed to September 27th. Everyone's waiting with bated breath to see if at least the September 27th or slightly later, it might even happen in October, whether NASA's next set of missions is about to take off or not. Last question, Advik. What do you know about the people who are likely to go to the moon and walk on the moon in the Artemis Mission III? How are they going to be different from all the 12 others who walked on the moon so far?
Artemis 3 will be the first rocket to send a woman to the moon. Artemis 3 will also send, for the first time, a person of color to the moon.
Do you know what a person of color means?
They have dark skin.
So why do you think it's important to send a woman to the moon?
I think men and women also are equally capable of being astronauts.
So they should get equal opportunities.
Yes, that is true, Auntie.
I think NASA is also thinking just like Advik. They want to ensure that there's equal opportunity for men, women, people of different skin colors and all of that. And hopefully this will happen in Artemis 3.
They don't want other people to miss that.
They don't want other people to miss out on these opportunities. The people who've not had that opportunity so far, right?
Right.
Yup, that is absolutely right. And we will wrap up today's session on that note. And we move on to the next interesting part of today's episode, which is
Quiz time! Let's see how well you listened.
question 1. Who was Artemis, the Greek goddess Artemis, who was her twin brother?
Apollo.
Question 2. How many astronauts from Earth have so far walked on the surface of the moon?
12.
And question 3. Please tell me if this is true or false. Whenever the Artemis I mission takes off from Earth, there will be a bunch of astronauts traveling in it.
False.
That brings us to the end of this episode. If you loved listening to this banter between Advik and I, please do click follow and subscribe button and do leave us a rating and a review. That would really help us understand how much you kids are enjoying listening to these podcasts. And just like Advik, just before bedtime, you too can turn off the lights, turn on this podcast and listen to it and have a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening.